You will now be placed into the conference.
Okay, so it is now 3 minutes after 12. We had to extend executive session a couple times, so we are now reconvened. And the topic is the SAR discussion. So who's leading out on this one? Someone's leading out on it?
Yeah. Well, Chairman French, we've got 3 members of the review committee here. We've got Gil and we've got Bruce and we've got Todd. Was there a chairperson of the committee?
Right here.
Oh, Bruce.
Bruce.
We understand there's a recommendation that's coming to the board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that, I think that's the subject of the dialogue, Commissioner French, and I don't care who discusses it, whether it's Bruce or Todd or Gil. There's a 4th member to it. He is not here.
Yeah, he's on a hunting trip.
He's on a hunting trip. Okay.
Bruce, why don't you go ahead and kick off with the recommendation?
Okay, well, the team spent a lot of time. We had 9 applicants. Each applicant, well, this is the stack right here. Each one of the applicants submitted a package that was roughly 70 pages long. We spent a lot of time reviewing it. We each reviewed independently and scored independently. And then we all got together on a Zoom meeting to compare notes and tally the scores. The way it ended up at this point is that we have 3 votes for a #1 team, and 1 vote. That there was 3 to 1 for the #1 position team, and the group that was in second place had 3 votes for second place, with a 3rd vote for 4th place. I mean, I can go through all that if you guys want, but our recommendation to the board was that we award to the team that ranked #1 out of these 9.
And that was who?
Bernardo Wills.
Okay. Okay.
So I'll go ahead and jump in. I've participated not only as a reviewer, but I've also participated since the 1st of January, and then even before that, when this project was initially started, 6 years ago, something like that, 8 years ago. And I would say that, yes, I'm the dissenting vote, but I also think that there is a process issue that jeopardizes the county's best interests. We have heard for months, and I don't want to speak for the Air Force because the Air Force is here, that a couple of things. #1 is the Air Force is the primary user of this facility. And that has directed the financial aspects and the financial review, and frankly, the financial feasibility of whether this project works. And so while it is a county-owned facility, it is an Air Force designed indoor shooting range to meet all of their standards. And there's 5 different documents of very specific Air Force standards that are supposed to be met for them to be able to occupy this facility. So, so that's been clear for months that we've been meeting. And so I believe the selection criteria for this is #1, that whoever the county chooses, first and foremost, needs to make sure that they can meet all of the criteria that are very specifically stated in all of these meetings. They're very specifically stated in the operating agreement between Spokane County and the Air Force. They will be very specifically stated in the intergovernmental services agreement between Spokane County and the Air Force, again, with great specificity. The unfortunate thing is the RFQ does not specifically spell out those documents. The RFQ on page 5 says it is anticipated that the Air Force will be a participant and use the facility, and that their requirements for the facility will be met. And then the other statement is that the design professional will be responsible for ensuring that all county and Air Force programmatic requirements are fulfilled. That's as specific as the RFQ gets with regard to the specific features. It does say that it also has to meet all county codes as well that are available. So as Bruce stated, we did have a robust response, but I don't think the RFQ was clear in the specific standards that need to be met. I believed that in the evaluation form, in my dialogue with the team that has worked on this, that the way that we would measure a firm's ability to meet the standard was based on their previous experience building similar facilities. That is not reflected in the evaluation. And when I say it's not reflected, I thought it was. If you look at the evaluation score sheet, criteria number 1 is their general experience as an architect. Criteria number 2 is their experience doing public works projects. And criteria number 3 was supposed to be specialty experience doing indoor ranges. Specifically, if it reflected the discussion we've had for months, it would be a military range, because military range standards are very different than municipal standards or public shooting ranges. And when we got together to score these, it became very clear in the review committee that we did not interpret item number 3, criteria number 3, which is the heavily weighted 30-pointer, in the same way. And so we did not specifically look, or at least I should say across the board, the review team did not look for experience building military indoor ranges. So first we have the RFQ, whether it was sufficiently specific. Second, we have whether the evaluation sheet adequately reflected what had been discussed in multiple meetings over several months. And then the last one is whether the submittals actually demonstrated any experience building military ranges, specifically indoor military ranges. The number 1 that Bruce has indicated has teamed up with a company called MWL. They have municipal experience, but did not cite a single example of building any military ranges. I don't know if they have or they haven't, but in their submittal, they do not specify a single one. And in the cover letter, MWL is referenced as the expert designing military ranges, indoor and tactical ranges. There is another submitter that teamed up with a company that alluded to a lot of experience doing military ranges, but was not clear whether they were indoor or outdoor. And then the third one, a third company had a lot of experience, but there were some other issues with regard to the submittal. And then there was a fourth one as well. So under the RFQ, there's a way to remedy that. Under the RFQ, under sections 10 and 11, it clearly states that you can either indicate a clear front runner or you create a short list and you interview your short list. And in this case, the dialogue came up, how much experience have any of these top 4 had in actually doing military ranges? So the number 1 has demonstrated 0. The number 2, and I'm just not putting them in ranking order or point order, I'm just saying a second submitter indicated outdoor military experience, but unclear whether indoor, and the list goes on. So we would have been able to gain that clarification on that question and others had we had a round 2 as the RFQ states under sections 10 and 11. The other 3 were not comfortable. We initially agreed to do a second round of interviews on the day that we ranked these. And by the next week, then there was disagreement about whether or not we would be able to do a second round. At that point, the dialogue was to go ahead and terminate this process and issue a second RFQ. That was the discussion I received from Gil on a phone call, that was his recommendation. And we were good to go with that. When we met a few days later though, that was no longer agreeable to the group. And so we agreed that we would go back and we would meet with the Air Force to gain greater clarification about the importance of their standards, the importance of their timeline, and we would actually additionally submit some clarifying questions to the number 1. And that's what we agreed to. But by the following week, when we started submitting our sample questions that we wanted, that was also rejected. So as a reviewer, I'm at a point where the additional information that I believed we were talking about before the RFQ was ever released, which was how would we know that a company can meet the standards? Because they give us documentation, they've met them before. There's been no way to get that clarification in this process. And we've burned close to 3 weeks at this point. We could have rewritten the RFQ in 24 hours and added clarifying language so that we knew what we were looking for in the submittals. We could have reflected that in the evaluation sheets, and we could have already been posted and advertised by now in the time that we've been trying to figure out whether or not there's sufficient evidence in the submittals to protect the county's financial interest. So at the end of the day, I don't know, other than one submittal that did point to indoor military ranges, I don't know if the other ones do or do not have this experience. But what I do know is that the Air Force is willing to pay 77% of the capital costs for phase one, and they're willing to pay 80% of the operating costs. And I am not convinced that the county has a viable financially viable project if that partnership is broken. And again, the only way that I know with confidence that we can meet the standard is that we're choosing somebody that this isn't their first time at the rodeo. This isn't their first time building one of these projects, but this is one of many, and as demonstrated with their past experience. So that's why that's the directive I've been given by the sheriff as long as I've been involved in this process. It is what I tried to reflect in the discussions that I've had in trying to gain more clarification and more information as is outlined in the RFQ. And I just don't think we're there yet. And so on behalf of the sheriff, I think the thing that would best protect the county's interests, make sure that we have somebody that has experience doing this, that it's reflected in the evaluation sheets, is that we terminate the current RFQ and then we issue a second one that reflects these items in the language of the RFQ and in the scoring sheets. So that's the discussion that we're bringing to the Board of County Commissioners.
My only concern with that is when we had that conversation, in doing this as a committee, you do this because it's your non-biased evaluation for who you feel is the best qualified candidate. And I feel that if we dissolve the RFQ and we rewrite the RFQ, we're no longer qualified to make that judgment. Because I don't think there's any way with everything that I've reviewed, it would be really hard for me to re-review it with those items in mind. So was our discussion that we had. If we move forward with rewriting the RFQ portion, we would not be able to partake in that judgment because we've already seen these documents. We've already read them, and I just don't know that we can be non-biased.
I'm going to go a step further on this. Municipalities all over this country and the government agencies all over this country contract with design teams for any number of projects, right? The Air Force has gone through a great effort to create their document that states exactly what their requirements are. They've got specifications, they've got specific documents they refer to that we can hand to any design team who has any competence at all and hand it to them and say, this is the requirement of the Air Force range, this is the requirement of the sheriff's range, you need to design to that. And as long as the county and the Air Force are at the design table when that is happening and ensuring that those criteria are met, it doesn't really matter whether they have exclusive shooting range experience or exclusive Air Force shooting range experience. The number one team the team that's currently ranked number one. Sorry.
Just trying to fix the camera.
Good. The current number one ranked team is a team that has done extensive jobs for the Air Force. They've done extensive projects for the military in general. Their specific consultant, their specialty consultant, has done shooting ranges all over North America. These people have the expertise to give you guys what you need, right? It falls on us to make, at the design table, to make sure that the criteria of the county and the Air Force are being met. I don't believe that we need to sole source a company or create an RFQ that is so tightly restricted that there's only a couple of companies in the country who can even apply for that. I think that limits us. I think that exposes us to a much higher cost in the design that certainly excludes any local firm right? Which means we're getting ready to spend 30 some odd $million on this project that's all going to go out of state, right? The design portion of this is going to be over $3 million. And if we rewrite the RFQ in such a manner that we exclude all local teams, then we're taking $3+ million of county dollars and not only sending it out of our community, we're sending it out of the state. And to me, that's unnecessary when we can find a team that I believe can do the job. It just may take a little more guidance on our part, or not even guidance, a little more supervision on our part to make sure that those requirements are being met.
So when you say, I think it's important that when you evaluate past work and somebody points to past work that they've done with the military or with the Air Force, one project is not equal another. And so if I look down a list and I see 5 projects that were dormitories on an Air Force base, I'm sorry, that is not the same technical standards as something that's specialized like an indoor firing range. And the fact is the number 1 submittal that has been referenced here did not show a single example of a military firing range. If you actually look at the ALSC submittal and their partner Garver, again, they listed multiple examples of military firing ranges. It's just unclear whether they're indoor or outdoor. And since we don't do a second round, evidently, and we're not going to ask supplemental questions, it becomes very difficult to determine whether any of the existing top 4 have the necessary or have the experience or not without that clarification. They may very well, but at this point, the process that was outlined in the RFQ, which clearly allowed for a second round of interviews, is not acceptable to the majority of this review team. And so it becomes impossible to determine whether there's supplemental information that would clarify this and reduce the risk to Spokane County. And if the current RFQ doesn't get us to that point where we can mitigate the risk and have that understanding, then I think the most time sensitive piece is to terminate this one and move on to a second process.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in?
You know, Chairman French, I wonder, Bruce, could you comment on Todd Milkey's why the review committee did not decide to interview the shortlisted firms?
I don't see the need. To me, the information provided in the RFQs is sufficient for us to have ranked these teams the way we did. Like I said, 3 out of the 4 members ranked Bernardo Wills as their number 1 choice, and the 4th member ranked them as number 2. They obviously have qualifications that fall within, you know, their level of expertise is such that we can take advantage of that and create a successful project.
So I need to clarify on the rankings and the scoring. So we all self-interpreted the criteria. We applied our scores, we submit our scores, then we talk about it, and we realize that we all apply the criteria differently. And there is no opportunity to go back and amend your scores. So the issue is what became very obvious is when we say, well, you got to look at the scores, what became very obvious is everybody applied different criteria to the scores. If I was going to amend my scoring because I didn't believe a 0 ranking was actually an option, but when I found out at least 2 of my teammates on the review team scored a 0, if I would have changed 1 score on the number 1, then we would have been within 5 percentage points of the top 4 teams, within 5 percentage points. And so I don't think that we can simply say, hey, we already scored these and this was the outcome. It became evident after the scoring was turned in that everybody applied different criteria. Some thinking military experience was in the criteria and others saying it was not.
Mr. Johnson, I certainly appreciate the partnership we've had with you and getting to this point. So any comments or observations that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I want to be careful that I'm not speaking out of turn for our contracting officers or than was able to get the government. But I do want to say Todd, if you could pull up the requirements document out of that Bernardo Wills document that's there. This document was completed back in June of 2017. This is the Air Force's requirement document that was submitted. We had contracted Bernardo Wills to do that for us. They produced this document. In there on page 3, it's very clear of the specifications that are required for us to allow this range to be used by Air Force personnel. So what I'm trying to say here is that it must be built to those specifications, or as much as I want to allow our guys to shoot there, I can't, because it has to be certified by the Security Force Center for the Air Force. The other point I want to make is that all military ranges are not the same. I can't, the Army does it a certain way, Marine Corps does it a certain way based on the long range rifle use outside 300 yards, 400 yards, whatever the case is. This is an indoor range with capabilities to allow us to use smaller targets to mimic that, but it is completely indoor range. And that's what the Air Force has gone to allow our airmen to shoot there. So those are just 2 key points I wanted to make, is that they absolutely enjoyed this partnership. Sheriff and I have been talking about this for 10 years. We actually started work on it 8 years ago. Every time he sees me, he says, "Where's my range?" We're trying to get there. And I think we're on the brink. And it's obviously a process that is Spokane County's process, so I don't want to get in the middle of that. But I do want to say we absolutely must have it meet the Air Force's specifications that are identified in here. And if you go to the one document, 11, the engineering technical letter that came out, we found a copy of that for everybody so you can see it. It's 54 pages, I believe it was 54 pages of specifications that the Air Force Security Force Center sent out that says this is what these have to be. And then there's 4 other processes you have to go through and different documents. So I just wanted to make sure that however the commissioners decide to go forward with this, that those are the things that are important to us and must be used. If we get to the end of this process and it doesn't meet those standards, I can't allow the airmen to shoot. So obviously, whoever is going to do this needs to be fully aware of that up front.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman
Thank you for your
French.
patience too.
uh,
An
Chair-
attorney.
Chairman French.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at Bruce and Bruce Russell and Todd Milkey. As I understand, the issue here is Todd would have liked the RFQ to have said, let me make another analysis. You can go to any attorney you want, and if you've got a will you want it prepared, if you go to an attorney that handles municipal law, I can do the will, but I can't, because I've been trained to do wills, but I can't do it as well as an attorney who specializes in wills and probate. And as I understand Todd Milkey's comments, he believes that the RFQ, we should be looking for someone who can do wills, not just do legal work. Is that correct, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, more specifically, the IGSA, the operating agreement, the requirements document specifically list 5 different Air Force standards that need to be, and when I say they're not just standards, books, I guess, 5 different books of Air Force standards that need to be met. And it's all, I'm gonna mess up and knock the page, but they are called out in the requirements document in just a couple of sentences. I mean, I'll just kind of show people it doesn't take a lot of text. And so I believe that we missed an opportunity, and it's just an oversight. I mean, to make our RFQ consistent with the legal documents that we're negotiating with the Air Force. So number one, I believe that our RFQ needs more specificity about what's being met. You know, we've had the discussion saying, how do you measure whether somebody can meet the specs or not? And really, you can ask them their opinion all day long. But at the end of the day, the only thing that I think I would bet on is if they've met the standards before in another project, and look to that. And so the question is if you've listed the standards in the RFQ, have you adequately identified those, recognized those, and weighted them in the evaluation sheet? and then you move on. And so I think that's my, I guess, heartburn with this is in hindsight, I don't know that the RFQ was specific enough to protect the county's interests. I don't know that the scoring sheet allowed us to weight in a way that protects the county's interests. And I would much rather make that correction now than after a facility's built and the bills due, not necessarily money's expended, and then find out that we missed. And I don't think that that's a great place to do it. Any one of these companies may be able to provide the information adequately, but we did not ask for that information specifically in this RFQ. We did not look for it in their submittals, and we certainly didn't score it in the evaluation sheets.
If we move forward, Chairman French, with the new RFQ, whatever criteria we come up with by that committee, even a firm that's designed one of these previously may not be the most highly qualified because they would get a certain number of points there, but not as many points in the other criteria. So the mere fact that you've designed a previous indoor small arms range consistent with Fairchild Air Force Base requirements doesn't mean that you're going to be selected as the most highly qualified. There may be other criteria, depends upon the weights that the committee comes up with for that. Is that not true?
Absolutely. Correct. I mean, there's multiple criteria in the evaluation sheet that we had 5 or 6, and they ranged in weight from 30 points down to 5 points. So you're correct. I mean, what you do is you build your evaluation sheet to reflect your priorities, and you score it in such a way that it weights the most prioritized items the heaviest.
And one other factor, Commissioner French, the RFQ, as I think, Todd, you mentioned, and Bruce, you did too, specifically says on page 5 of 48, the DP will be responsible for ensuring that all county and Air Force programmatic requirements are fulfilled. And again, maybe, Todd, I'm too close to this. That kind of means to me that these criteria that you're referencing that it has to be designed to, it has to be designed to. And then, as you have alluded to also, Todd, on page 20 of 48, where we have the criteria on number 3, which you've identified as 30 points applicable to, it's identified as firms specialized small arms training facility experience. Admittedly, it doesn't talk about indoor. Admittedly, it doesn't talk about Fairchild standards. But Bruce Russell would argue any architect, if he's given this criteria that you've just handed to Jeff Johnson, should be able to design a facility to meet that, because that's what architects do. Is that correct, Bruce?
Absolutely.
And that's why, that's your argument. I assume in support of going with firm number 1.
Well, and even take that a step further, the Air Force has already reached out to this firm to create their requirements document. So they obviously have felt that they have adequate experience in dealing with the Air Force and their requirements.
So the requirements document is just a checklist. It is not a design. And I would say that, Jim, you have this right, which is, yeah, you could say that if a professional firm can meet the standards, why isn't that good enough? And so, so then it comes back to the Board of County Commissioners as a risk assessment, which is how much risk does the Board of County Commissioners want to assume in this project?
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to get Jeff here, and then I'll come back to you, Ozzie.
Just one small clarification point. Bernardo Wills was chosen because we had them on contract as providing engineering services for us. When we reached out to them, they were the people that we already had on contract, advice going out to them specifically.
Just like we've got professionals on call. Ozzie?
Commissioners, the reason I think that this is so vital, that we actually put it in the RFQ. I'm a fan of just bringing them all 4 back in and asking the questions. But if we're going to do it all over again, the reason it has to be spelled out is this. I disagree with Bruce's analogy wholeheartedly. Because when we went with the CAD system, from a company that said, oh, we can do all this. All right, we can do it all. And quite frankly, I cautioned against going with the company that threatened to sue us if we didn't allow them to bid. We were going to sole source. We ended up going with that company, and the mindset of, well, it'll be okay if we babysit them. We have babysitted that company ever since we signed the contract with them. We have matter of fact, one of our employees is at the level that she basically has redesigned the entire system, trying to make it work. It still doesn't work. It doesn't work to the point that SPD is looking to leave that particular CAD system. I've been at that point 4 years ago, and we're going to be looking at coming to Shrek and saying, we really need to get a new company and fix this problem, because you can't necessarily babysit somebody into getting this right. They either know how to do it right or they don't. And I don't want, especially on this one, I don't want this to be the learning experience for a company. I want a solid company that knows how to do this. I want this done right, and I want our partners to feel comfortable that it is going to be done right. But I've been down this road before. I've heard these same arguments of, oh, they'll be able to get it done. Well, they didn't. And we're about ready to spend another multi-million-dollar project to fix a mistake that we made 6 years ago. So that's where, commissioners, that's where I weigh in, is this needs to be done right. And we can't take the risk of, well, if we just babysit them, we'll get it through. We need experts. We need the people that know how to do this, and we need them to do it correctly the first time, because there won't be a second time.
So Commissioner Cooney, Kearns, you've been listening. Your thoughts, questions?
You know, I agree with what the sheriff said just now. You know, this is it's a lot of money, and quite frankly, it's a risk. I don't really think I feel comfortable going with somebody that, you know, I'm sure every single firm that applied is a top caliber firm, but I worry about weighing that risk with the amount of funds, knowing that you know, our partner on this venture can walk away if it doesn't meet their standards.
Mr. Cooney?
So yeah, so I agree with that, you know, that should have been part of the RFQ, was that they had to meet the standards, you know, and they're at risk if we don't meet those standards, because you know, again, everyone knows I'm married to a contractor, and there's a risk to this, and it's not going to be on the contractor, it's going to be on the design firm. And so somehow that has to be part of the design firm. It should have been part of the RFP that they have to guarantee that they're meeting the requirements, because the contractor is just building to those requirements and specifications. And so it's truly on the design firm to ensure to us that we are not responsible if this does not meet Air Force requirements. And so I'm hearing earlier talks too that is not in the specifically in there. And that has to be in there. And the other thing I guess I see about this, there's a couple things. It's a specialty. This is a specialty building. This isn't just a building that you can, you know, make adjustments to, all of that. This is a very specialized facility. One, because it's an indoor gun range, and secondly, because it's a Air Force, you know, building that we have to meet their specifications. And so those are two things that, again, to me, should be weighted appropriately in the design, and Gail, I guess, for you and Bruce, I'm concerned that we didn't have somebody from the outside come in and help sit on that committee. A lot of times you'll see contractors sit on design committees when they're doing RFQs, just because they see it from a different perspective than what you do. And so having 3 people from the same department and not having kind of that outside independent look, which I see a lot in the industry. I would have preferred that, and probably going forward would like to request that you do that. There's a lot of retired contractors who build buildings that aren't going to be bidding on this, that would be more than helpful to have, spend a couple days on one of these review teams, because I see it a lot in the industry. So those are just some of the things that I think I'm a little concerned about as I see this process. And again, with it being a specialty item, I know, again, with design build, looking at it from that side, that I see a lot. Yeah, there's teaming up that occurs with local entities and national firms, so that they do provide that local characteristic and understand the local nature of it. So, just if we were going to have it go back out again, I don't think we would just see all outside companies. I think you still see local companies that then team up with somebody who has got that experience, so that way it makes them for a stronger team as they're looking at proposing on this. So like I said, I'm concerned that we didn't really look at this as a true specialty building, and ensure that the information's in there and weighted, so that yes, we are going to get someone who's got that. And again, ensuring that we have to ensure that whoever gets this is guaranteeing that if something doesn't meet the standards and the Air Force somehow doesn't approve it, that's not on us. I mean, that's got to be on the design firm, because it's not on the contractor, because they're just building to the specifications, and we're ensuring they're building to the specifications of the design firm. So those are the thoughts that I have that are concerning to me.
So we obviously have some concerns, some questions that need to be addressed, and before we move forward and stuff. So we can reconvene this afternoon. I know that it's past the lunch hour. Everybody take a break, and let's reconvene at 3:30 3:35 this afternoon, and we'll have some other questions for the review team to decide what we're going to do here in terms of either accepting the recommendation or going back out. Were there any what in the RFQ, was there any language that dealt with insurance and limits on that?
Chairman French.
Yeah, I don't have to know right now. Maybe just look at it and see if that comes back this afternoon and stuff, because the biggest thing, and I think both Mary and Josh indicated, and Ozzy did as well, the financial risk that the county will be under if we don't meet the target. I mean, this is I go back to medical examiner building. That required a very specific design skill set. We were very deliberate about making sure that whoever the team was, that they had that expertise on board before we selected somebody. But the difference was, if we screwed that up, it's our building, and we're going to be responsible for 100% of the cost. Here, we have a partner that's having an expectation that we're going to meet 100% of their needs. And if we miss it, 99% is not good enough. If we miss it, then we own the building and we're going to pay for it, and they're going to have the opportunity to go walk and go find someplace else to use. That's a financial risk that I'm not comfortable taking without knowing darn well that we got a design team that has got the experience to be able to hit the bar. And if they don't have the bar, if they have that experience, that they got the insurance necessary to protect us when they don't and stuff. So let's reconvene at 3:35 this afternoon, and and continue to discuss this and develop a strategy for what we want to do to move forward with. Okay? All right. So it is now 12:43, and I think we need to take a break. We've been at this now for quite a while. We'll reconvene this afternoon at 2 o'clock, finish up the rest of ours, and for this topic, we'll be meeting at 3:35 is what we have it dialed in for. Okay? Thank you. So we are adjourned for lunch. Have a great meal.
I have a meeting with the NAACP. They don't know how long.